on Ed Sullivan. I just gotta stand there. I can't move at all. The United States Council of Catholic Bishops has a ministry called Migrant and Travelers. And what this ministry does is it goes out to the people whose jobs and the lifestyle that's caused by those jobs can't get to church, but they want to get to church. They don't have a home parish, so the church goes to them and brings the sacraments to them. We have people that go to truck stops, we have people that go to seaports, we have people that go to the airports, and as some of you know, I've been assigned to work with circuses, rodeos, and traveling shows. The rodeo cowboys have a saying, "The man is all head and no cattle." The wrestlers have a saying, "Don't talk the talk if you can't walk the walk." And what those sayings really mean is, don't shoot off your mouth if you're not going to be there when it counts. We see that in today's gospel. We have the first son. The father comes to him and says, "I want you to go out in the vineyard." And he says, "Nah." But when it really counts, when it really matters, he's there. He's the one that's doing the work. The other son, all hat, no cattle. Talks the talk, but can't walk the walk. When it really mattered, even though he said everything that the father wanted to hear, the guy was nowhere to be found when it really, really mattered. Now, I grew up in a neighborhood that was exactly like this. I grew up on 60th between Capitol and Melvina. If you're born and raised Milwaukeean, that's where Capitol Court used to be. If you're new to Milwaukee, that's where the Midtown Center is now. And this was in the 1960s into the 1970s. And at that time, the most popular TV show was called All in the Family. And for those of you who might not have seen it in reruns, it's the main character, Archie Bunker, had all kinds of comments about people of color, different religions, especially Catholics and Jews, against women's lib, against the hippies, the yippies, and the SDS, Students of a Democratic Society. Lord, the things that man said. The nicest thing he ever said on that show was calling his son-in-law the dumb Pollock and the meathead. Give you an idea. My dad was Archie Bunker. He had his own chair that nobody could sit in except him. He had a beer in one hand and a cigar in the other. And when he got going, what he said about people of color, people of different religions, about the hippies. And we had another neighbor, Mr. Don, and when the two of them got together with the beer, oh my, what they said. We also had a number of neighbors who were self-proclaimed modernist progressives. And whatever Dad and Mr. Don were for, they were against. Whatever Dad and Mr. Don were against, they were for. These guys would talk up Reverend Martin Luther King, Reverend Jesse Jackson, Cesar Chavez, and the United Farm Workers. They knew all the good words to say. They were politically correct before politically correct was a thing. And of course, when we got together for block parties or holiday celebrations, you can imagine some of the conversations we had. But unlike today, back then when everybody had their say, they all just had another beer and said, "Yeah, you're right," or "You're wrong, I'm right." Then they talked about the Packers. Unlike today, where if you even disagree with me a little bit, I hate you, you're evil, you're vicious, I'm never going to talk to you again. But then something very interesting happened in the neighborhood. We had an African-American family actually move in. And they had a son that was the same age as my younger brother. And one day my dad's in the kitchen with his cigar and his beer, and he looks out the window and there's my brother with his brand new best friend. And my dad said, And then a little while later we had a Jewish family move in, and they had a daughter that was in between the age of my two sisters, and she joined the little backyard play group. And my dad looked out the window and said, And then we had a family from Mexico move in. And eventually we even had an Iranian Muslim. Now this was before the Shah, before Al-Qaeda, before ISIS. Most Milwaukeeans couldn't even find Iran on a map, and if they did, they would point to Baghdad in Iraq and say close enough. But we had an Iranian Muslim in the backyard. And my dad would just look out the window and go, And then one day I looked out the window and I noticed something. There was somebody missing from this beautiful rainbow. There was somebody missing from our own private little United Nations. The children of the self-proclaimed modern progressives. Not only were they not in the backyard, they weren't even in the neighborhood anymore. As soon as that first family moved in, before they even settled in, the for sale signs started going up. Oh, and they had good reasons. Oh, I need a bigger house, we're outliving our space. Oh, I want more land. We've got to go out to the suburbs. Some were a little bit more honest. They said, research shows crime goes up when the neighborhood changes. Statistics show the school quality goes down when the neighborhood changes. But even in my little 14-year-old mind, I realized what was going on. As long as Reverend Martin Luther King was lobbying for open housing in Biloxi, Mississippi, they were for it. As long as Jesse Jackson wanted school desegregation in Little Rock, Arkansas, they were for it. As long as Cesar Chavez wanted decent conditions for the migrant workers and they stayed in Florida and California, they were for it. But when those folks came up north, when those folks came to Wisconsin, when they came to Milwaukee, when they came to our neighborhood and moved next door in one case, those self-proclaimed progressives, as they say in Africa, gone. They were all happy, no cattle. They walked the walk, but when the time came to talk the talk, they talked the talk, but when the time came to walk the walk, they were nowhere to be seen. Not only did they not walk the walk, they ran in the opposite direction. Now, as the years went on, my dad stayed. He had no intention of ever leaving the neighborhood. And when people would say, Lou, with the way you talked, we thought you'd be the first guy to leave, he'd just kind of shrug, and like the son and the first son, he just would say, they're my neighbors. That was it. No other explanation. And as the kids grew, my dad would watch over them, and if they did something good, like got a good grade or got an award, he was the first one to say, good job, keep it up. When my brother and his friend kind of strayed off the path, more naughty than bad, he would gently bring them back. He made sure that everybody knew that he was there for them if they needed him. Dad never did leave that neighborhood. He died in his bed right there on 60th and Capitol. And at the funeral, we never knew this, but the young man who started it all, who is now a Navy war hero from the first Gulf War, told us that there were two things that he taped to the inside of his locker. One was the citation for his awards, and the other was a picture of my father. And when the other African American soldiers would tease him and say, who is that white man in your locker? He'd just say, that's my dad. And everybody knew he didn't push it any further. He had that kind of respect. He had that kind of standing because he was the one when it really mattered that stayed. He was the one that didn't leave. He was the one that had no hat but had the cattle. He was the one that didn't have the time to talk the talk because he was too busy walking the walk. So my brothers and sisters, that raises an interesting question for us. Which one of these are we? Are we the people that have the right sign in our front yard, have the right bumper sticker, we know all of the current phrases and all of the pop things that are right to say to prove that we're woke, whatever that means? Or are we the people that are right there when it really counts, that will actually do something? Which one are we? It's a question we're all going to have to ask ourselves. And hopefully, we like the answer.